Good morning. It is November 11th, 2024, and it's Veterans Day. Shout out to all the veterans that are watching, and everywhere else in the world where they call this Armistice Day and things like that, remembering all the veterans and all the men and women that gave their lives protecting democracy around the world from fascist regimes the last couple times we did this. Anyway, we're on to NASA Days, Episode 6. And we're going to talk about STS 27R. We're going to take you back to the summer of 1986. And I finally got my secret clearance. Mine was delayed a little bit, because basically I filled out my questionnaire honestly, especially the part where they asked, in the last 5 years, have you taken any illegal drugs? Now, most people just say no and be done, especially if there's nothing you can prove. But I have a hard time lying. So I answered the question honestly. I said yes. And then they wanted to know all kinds of specifics. I've decided not to go into the specifics in this video for two reasons. First, I don't want to encourage anyone. I don't want to try and advocate for that activity or anything. And secondly, I don't want to violate any community guidelines. So we're just going to say my security clearance took a little bit longer than everyone else's. Most people got their security clearance in 4 or 5 months, whereas mine took close to a year. But in the end, I did get my secret clearance. In the future, all of the security questionnaires I had to fill out, I was saved by that little caveat in the beginning. In the last 5 years, have you? And I said, nope. So the next mission after Discovery's return to flight, which we talked about in the last episode, was the Space Shuttle Atlantis on STS-27R. This was another DoD secret payload, and fortunately I had my secret clearance at this time, so there was no issue with me getting kicked out of the firing room again like on Atlantis' maiden flight. And if you want to go back and check out episode 2, you can find out what happened there. This time, though, I was going to be prime. So the flow through the OPF and the VAB went normally. As we rolled Atlantis out to the pad, I was starting to get excited and a little nervous because this was the first time I was actually going to be on console. I would be the one communicating with the test director, orbiter test director, and NASA test director. I'm going to be running the procedures. So I had been through numerous countdown simulations beforehand, and I made my mistakes there. So I was confident I was going to be okay on launch day. One of the first launch simulations I was on, we were counting down, and we were under T-minus 31 seconds when there was some question on console about the Space Shuttle main engine bleed valves. And I'll do a whole thing on the Space Shuttle main engines and the parts, I think, in an upcoming video. But somebody was asking me, why are the bleed valves still open as we were counting down under 31 seconds? And so, wanting to be safe, I called over the net saying we had an anomaly, that the bleed valves were open and they should be closed. Now, the engine systems operator at C3, happened to be a friend of mine, Ed, tried to break in and say, no, they go closed at T-minus 10 seconds when we send the start enable command. But it was too late for that simulation launch. GLS had already broken out of the launch countdown and they were recycling back to 9 minutes. It was a mistake, and I'll never make that mistake again, but I made it in simulation. I did annoy the sim people, though, because they had planned to do a BFS engaged abort for the backup flight computer system, and they had all that planned, and it was going to happen, and I kind of destroyed that by breaking us out early, but they razzed me a little bit for that. Some of the propulsion engineers called me Bobby Bleed Valves for many years after that, making sure I never forgot that mistake, and I never did. But this time, I was ready. I had my, what we call a brain book. It was just a 3-ring binder where I had all the information I thought I would need. I had schematics, I had tables, I had notes, I had all the things to help me remember in case of something came up, I could quickly flip to it and find out what it was. I put "Don't Panic" on the cover of the binder of my brain book, just like Hitchhiker's Guide. In case of emergency, I grab my book, it says "Don't Panic," I open it up, I find the information I need. I also made a special version of the launch countdown procedure. We call the procedure SU7 or S0007, pronounced SU7. And I made a special version with just the parts that had my call sign in there. Our call sign was CCME, which stood for, the first C was console, because it was a console position. CME was controller main engines. So my position in the firing room was console controller for the main engines. And I had all the steps that had CCME in it, CCME highlighted. And I also had the full terminal count and all the abort procedures in there. So I called it the Su-7 Good Parts version, which was a kind of recognition and a play. If you follow Princess Bride, you know that book originally, the movie was basically the good parts of the original book. We had a dress rehearsal called the Terminal Countdown Demonstration Test. Its procedure number was Su-17 or S0017. Commander Robert Hoot Gibson got on board, and pilot Guy Gardner, who was his first space shuttle flight, he was a rookie. They both got on and strapped into the flight deck for the terminal countdown demonstration, followed by mission specialist Richard Mullane, Jerry Ross, and William Shepard. William was also making his first space flight, so there were two rookies. Remember on STS 26, I said they were all seasoned pros. We've had some people back in with their first space flight experience. Once on board, we didn't close the hatch for the terminal countdown demonstration test. We'd leave the hatch open, and the white room is there, and the closeout crew are there. We counted down, and we do a simulated abort, a cutoff of the main engines. Following this, the crew performs what they call a simulated Mode 1 egress, which means they unstrap themselves from their seats in the space shuttle, and they, in buddies, in pairs, they egress out of the space shuttle, and they follow the yellow tape on the walkway through the white room, out the gangway, to the level where the slide wire baskets were. They get into the slide wire baskets. Once they're in the slide wire baskets, they hit the release button. However, for this test, the baskets are locked, so they're not actually going to go for a ride. It's not really going to be the e-ticket ride like it would have in a real emergency. This one was just going in, make sure they understand how to get in, what to do. And after the test was finished, the rest of the pad flow was nominal. And the super secret payload was installed, which Wikipedia says was a Lacrosse surveillance satellite. I can neither confirm nor deny that. I actually don't know what the satellite was. I trust Wikipedia. The only secret stuff, that we would know as an engine guy would be the time of launch, the intended time of launch, because I sat next to the orbiter avionics people that had to send that up to the vehicle at about T-minus 1 hour and 30 minutes before launch. They actually sent a keyboard command to tell the orbiter what time the intended T0 was. That was secret. Once the space shuttle launched, the actual launch time obviously was unclassified because it's visible. Anyone can see it. But what remained to be secret was whether it was the actual intended time to launch. Because I guess you could figure out, if you knew the intended time, you could work out orbital mechanics and dynamics and figure out what was the intended orbit and what kind of satellite would be best in that orbit. Anyway, I don't know any of that stuff. So, with everything closed out, launch was scheduled for December 1st, but we ended up scrubbing due to weather. On December 2nd, I was at the console keyboard. My NASA counterpart was Chris, a young engineer, worked for NASA, and the Rocketdyne person was a guy named Ken, ended up being a good friend of ours, who was been around for a while. He was the wisdom there, and as we got close to terminal count, the excitement rose, as did the tension. All the LCCs were going through my head. I kind of think about, what would I do if this happened? And planning in my head as I knew the countdown was going on. My eyes were scanning all the data on our launch commit criteria monitor program that I wrote. Check back on episode 4, I think, on that one. Fortunately, it was fairly easy to monitor because all of the data was in cyan if it was within limits. If there was a failure or an out of limits condition, it went red, and yellow was used for transitory things. For example, engine ready parameters would start as yellow, but as we got down in the count and things like pressurizing the LOX tank would cause the inlet liquid oxygen inlet temperatures to come within limits, and they would go from yellow to cyan. As we got to the final parameter for the pressurizing the hydrogen tank, the low pressure inlet pressure for the fuel turbines would come in within limit, and those would go to cyan. And then at about T minus 90 seconds, everything was cyan. And so you could look at the display, and if it was all cyan, everything was good, and you could quickly glance at it. But I would scan all the numbers and make sure I knew what it was doing. Then we got to go for RSLS start in the last 31 seconds. This is an intense time. You could hear a pin drop in the firing room. Everyone was concentrating on their displays, and all chatter stopped. It was just dead silence in the room. At T minus 10 seconds, GLS called for go for main engine start. My eyes make their way from the computer screen we were looking at. I looked over to the TV screen where we had a close-up view of the 3 engine nozzles. And I watch as the engines go through their start sequence and they ramp up. You can see the vibration and all the fire come out. As they ramp up to full thrust, you see what they call a mock diamond. It's a blue mock diamond. We had black and white TV sets, but it was just like a highlighted mock diamond. You would see it form at the exit of the nozzle, and then you would see it move down out of the camera range. And as long as the mock diamond was not visible, you were good. If you started to see the mock diamonds coming back, that means the engine was shutting down and you were going to have a pad abort. And then I would move my eyes back over to the computer monitor and see what happened. This time, there was no issues. The mock diamonds did not come back, and at T0, the solid rocket boosters ignited, and then my focus moved back to the computer display. We watched the computer display during ascent. We saw engines throttle down. We saw them throttle back up. We heard the call, go at throttle up. Everything was good. The SRB separated. There was an applause in the firing room. Everyone still cheered. They cheered for many days, many years after that, whenever the solid rocket booster separated. At about 4 minutes into flight, though, our display turned red. Engine 1 reported a FID, or a failure ID. A failure ID was 111, which meant that a single sensor had failed. It ended up, the FID decode worked, and it provided us with a message that said, engine 1 high-pressure fuel turbine temp failed high. Now, this was the only sensor that failed, fortunately, and because of that, we didn't have the same issue that STS-51F had, if you remember from episode 1. We were able to, and we didn't have to do an abort to orbit. We were able to keep thrusting, no other sensors failed, just that one single sensor failure, and we made orbit. Atlantis was able to complete its mission, and Atlantis then landed out in California on December 6th, 1988. And its mission was complete, and it was my first mission that I was on prime firing room for. So over the next few years, I'd generally be in the firing room, either for propellant loading or for launch. And up next, we'll talk about some of the big ticket items, some of the payloads that I got to work with and see on there. I'm also going to do a Space Shuttle main engine overview, SSME 101 for people. So look forward to that. Those will be coming up sometime in the future here. So I'm not quite sure how regular my schedule is going to be because of everything happening going on here. But I hope you enjoyed it. This will be episode number 6, and on our NASA Days videos. Have a great day, and we'll talk to y'all later.